Often our legends and mythological stories hold profound truth. And today we're going to look at the story of Rip Van Winkle. And as we are told, Rip went to the mountains and slept for 20 years. And then after that period of time returned to his community and family and found things profoundly different. Martin Luther King once preached a sermon entitled "Sleeping Through a Revolution." And in that sermon, he said the tragedy of Rip Van Winkle was not so much that he slept for 20 years, but the particular 20 years through which he had slept. They were the years in which the American Revolution took place. History changed radically and moved in a whole new direction. And he pointed out that if we are not awake and aware as to what's going on in our world, we run the risk of missing some of the most profound changes, not only in our lives, but in history itself. And it is said that Rip went to sleep in the Catskill Mountains, which are not very far from here. And in fact, many of our prisons are located in the Catskill area. And what we're going to be examining today is the question, is there a parallel between Rip Van Winkle and people serving long sentences in prison? Does the Rip syndrome apply to people in prison?
I believe that it does. Rip Van Winkle Syndrome does apply to people in prison. I've spent personally I've done a lot of time in prison. This is my third time around. It's not a proud factor, but it's a fact. And I've experienced the gap that occurs when you come into prison for a certain period of time, and then when you're released and go back into society, and you do not find the same situations that exist at the time before you were incarcerated. For instance, as it was pointed out before about seeing children, youngsters that you knew as children, and you come out, they're teenagers or they're young adults, and you don't know how to or try to relate to them. Being off the street right now for 10 years, for example, how do I deal with a young kid that is into crack as the dope thing of the present, as opposed to when we were children or kids or young men and we were dealing in another area of drugs in the street? That's something that I had a discussion with another person about, in trying to visualize how to deal constructively with that individual and get him to change his way of seeing things, just as I should have changed my way of seeing things when I was in the street.
Does anyone know what Rip felt when he returned?
I think we ought to deal with the symbolism that you earlier talked about, that's kind of hidden into the writings of Rip Van Winkle. First of all, he didn't go in a valley to go to sleep. He went into the mountains. Now, whether or not that is the Catskills or the mountains of Iraq, most people think of mountains as a place where you meet God, as a place where you do heavy meditation, as a place where you do a lot of sleeping.
Easterners in the mountains do.
Was that?
Not for that.
Well, granted, but like I'm saying, the mountain area is normally a place of reflection. It's a place of meditation where you communicate with God. Moses went up on the mountain, not to sleep, but to find God. People have always worshipped throughout history on high mountains. They went there not to sleep, but to communicate. Rip Van Winkle went there to sleep. And he went there to sleep, as Martin Luther King said, during a time when the world was facing one of its greatest problems. And not only did he go there to sleep, he left wife and family. Wife and family were not taken with him. And he came back 20 years later. He was lucky. He found his wife and he found his kids, though they were adults. People who come to prison can do one or two things. They can sleep like Rip Van Winkle, or they can take that time to meditate, reflect, and educate the mind. And some of them return to the street to find their families. I would say that the guy who sleeps in prison, like Rip Van Winkle, will probably wake up to a nightmare if he expects to find his family. The person who stays awake during that particular period of time might have a much better time to make a reality out of this, the results of that story than one who just takes the actual bedtime nap.
I don't think it really matters, Lonnie. I think it matters for the guy that has a family who maintains constant contact with him while he's in the prison. But for the guy who has no contact with the outside world while he's in prison, I don't think it really makes a difference whether he sleeps or not. I understand that you're making a clear distinction between a guy who continues to make an effort to develop himself and a guy who just laid back. But I'm saying that in terms of the Rip Van Winkle Syndrome, behind that wall, you're shut off. There's nothing that we can see beyond that wall, unless we have the eyes of loved ones who extend our vision beyond the wall. And even in developing, while we are behind the wall, we sort of like develop in a vacuum. We don't really know how much validity our development takes on until we goes beyond that wall
and still
face that shock.
And still the surprise, the surprise of even though you may know certain things have changed, certain things have come about, but actually seeing them is still a shock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, feeling that change.
Yeah, it's just like you can stay awake and you can know everything that's transpired in the street or wherever you're going, but to see it is also a shock. Like you say with kids, I've been away 15 years. The child that I left, that was 1 year old, is now 15. Yeah. And I know this, and I'm aware of this. But when I see the child,
The reality.
Wow.
The reality is different. If you were confined for a lot of time, all right, like Lonnie said, there is a difference for a person to be confined and not do anything as opposed to him doing something with his time. That's cool because that's a positive aspect. But you also have a point
there's
too.
There's another part to that Lonnie, I think, was pointing to. Is there a unique view that you can have from the mountains or from the prison that in fact gives you an insight that you may not get even on the street that you carry back with you?
Well,
you can get the insight. You can get the insight, but the actual experience is still, I think it's three parts.
That's why I disagree with. That's why I disagree about this. See, authentic experience can take place in prison. This whole thing about if I'm not on that side of the wall, I'm not really alive. I'm alive and well on either side of the wall that I'm on. And the picture I tried to draw is sleepfulness and a person being awake to his life. All right. Now, in that picture of whether he is asleep or whether he is awake, I stated that wakefulness, doing when you're awake, you meditate, you educate, and you think about life. I've mentioned the subject of Rip Van Winkle finding family, and the fact that most prisoners who return don't find families. Whether you stay awake or not in prison, you may or may not find families because there's a lot of dynamics going on with them that may separate you. But the guy who is awake and who is aware, all right, that he is alive behind those walls, that he is not asleep behind those walls, that he is a living entity and maintains contact with the outside world, I think he can see beyond these walls. I don't think a person necessarily needs a loved one to see out from behind this wall. The human mind, the human intellect, a book can take me to China, Japan, Europe, anywhere I want to go. I can go through literature. I can go through the academical centers you have here. I can go through television. I can go through radio. Nothing confines me behind these walls except my physical presence and my own inability or unwillingness to learn and experience life as best I can right here.
I've heard the same thing before.
I agree with you on all that. I'm just saying that it's 3 stages to Rip Van
Nah,
Wrinkle.
how can you agree with that? What you're saying is that you develop in prison the same way you develop outside.
That's what you said. That's not what I said.
No,
That's what you said.
Okay, all right.
I
He's
said.
saying that you could be aware of.
Okay.
See, no, listen. There's a difference between sameness. The only way I can develop the same way that I develop when I'm in the street is to be in the street.
Okay.
And the only way I can develop the same way as I would develop in prison is to be in prison.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that there is authentic development in both places and in both areas if the individual so chooses to have the courage to face that.
I agree with that.
all right.
I ain't got no problem with that. I'm just saying that there's another stage to it. There's another stage to Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome. Is that once he wakes up, he went back to his family. He had a family to go back to. But still there was a shock of seeing his children adults. Seeing his children as adults. He has missed that. And no books, no whatever you do, visits and all that, can substitute that experience of actually being there with your kids growing up.
That's what I wanted to get into, because that is something that's missing. You know, the vicarious experience is what you're really talking about when you're in prison. You know, like the president gets shot in the street, an event that affects every individual in the country, like Kennedy. If you were in prison, that experience doesn't really mean that much to you, because you know you can't live it out in a sense. If you're in the street, you can relate to it because it seems to affect you directly. Where in a prison setting, it doesn't.
See, that's why I disagree.
Hold on for a second.
I don't understand.
You may disagree with that, but you're saying, and I've heard that before, that you're physically confined, but mentally you're out there, and that to me, you can only be out there vicariously. You can only experience.
That's not what I'm saying at all.
Excuse me for a minute. So far up to a certain point.
But that's not what I'm saying. You're misquoting me, and that's why I'm interjecting. You're misquoting me. I'm not saying. I'm saying this. That we have a tendency of saying
the authenticity of the development is the same.
It's right. No,
right. Not the same, but it's just as good.
It's just as good. I'm saying that we have locked ourselves.
Right.
It's different.
It is definitely
We
different.
have locked ourselves into believing that there's a standard way of life, and if we deviate from the standard, then life cannot be lived in its fullness. But this outline, you know, I often say when I get out of jail, I want a home, a wife, 2 kids, and a dog
Standard
named
way of
Spot.
living. That's what you're saying.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, but however, what I'm saying is this: that a person in prison can you know, it's not kind of like that. I guess stoicism. You know, you accept and you make the best out of what is there. You know, and I think we have gotten away from that. We have gotten away from saying, let me live my life in the midst of my life, wherever my physical being may be.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know, like, to me, it would appear that a person must do 2 things while he's in prison, especially if he's doing long time, you know. He must first deal with the facts of his imprisonment, all right? And that is his immediate experience. But he also tries to prepare himself for a life after that experience. So he's trying to prepare himself for an experience, you know what I mean, that he hasn't dealt with yet, all right? And really, those are the 2 primary factors that drive a person. And it can cause a person to suffer. While the person is here, he does all within his power, you know, to live a full life while he's in prison. This is a person who's aware or has come to grips with the fact that he's going to be here a long period of time, right? He has a choice. He can stay here and bemoan the fact of all the things that he's missing. You know, you see guys, you talk to them, man, say, how you doing? So I ain't doing too good. So why? So because I'm in jail. But what does that mean? What does that mean? That means I can't do this. In other words, what he's saying, that means to say I can't live my life like I'm in the street. In other words, he says, I'm not in the street. You are not in the street. You know, as I said before, a person learns to live his life even if it's in a matchbox. So that's what the basic requirement of doing long time requires. All that it entails. But at the same time, he realizes there's going to come a period of time when he goes in the street. He's going to be with his wife and his family and all the rest of that. And all the time that he's developing himself and dealing with his current situation, you know what I mean, growth occurs on the outside. There's an experience that is happening on the outside to all his loved ones that he cannot himself share. Okay? And when he goes on the outside, there's that gap. Now he's got to adjust to that. No matter how hard he strives while he's in here, he can never adequately, you know what I mean, just
That's
step
what I was.
in the
That's
outside
what I was
step.
saying. Was the
That's what I meant by
Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome. That gap,
The only
that experience that
problem,
you don't have.
I
But
agree
that
with that.
occurs all
But
over.
that
Okay, but we're focusing on prison. We're not
No,
focusing on anything else.
We're focusing on the human experience.
Oh, now we're focusing on whether or not
No. So
the
we are
prison has
focusing.
the Van Winkle effect. This is the subject
We
title.
are focusing on the human experience. And
You are
you are lying.
Yes,
You are lying because
Yes.
Rev made a
Okay.
statement about prison.
listen.
Prison.
Rev made a statement about prison, and he also
That's what
made
he
a
said.
statement about the Catskills, where there's a whole lot of nice hotels.
Where, no, he said where all the prisons are
resorts,
certified.
Where most
resorts,
He
and
didn't say all
mountains.
We're not talking about none of
No,
that.
you ain't talking. You ain't talking about that.
He didn't say all that.
That's what that.
Only thing he said,
Excuse me. Let's ask Rev what he read.
most of your prisons
Did you
are found in the
mention- did you
Catskills.
That's what you said, right, Rick?
I mentioned the Catskills, but I didn't mention hotels.
Do they
That's
have the
correct.
hotels up there?
No, we
You
didn't
talked
what we
about
had.
where the prisons are
Okay,
located.
let's talk about pork.
Let me ask another question.
Go ahead.
Why does a person choose sleep?
Because he's not responsible, then, Rick. You
And
don't have
No,
to
you
do
can't even
nothing.
answer that. You're not even in that category, so you couldn't even answer it.
You know what? See, this is the smartest guy I know him.
Yeah, he brilliant.
This is a brilliant guy. He done.
Because
Yeah,
I'm saying that because of this.
Okay, all right.
You know,
Let me
I've
hear it.
seen other brothers. I've seen an actual dude sleep physically sleep through a whole bed. Now I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced that, but I've seen it. I've seen a dude come to the yard, lay down on the ground, sleep, get up, go to chow, come back in the ground, sleep, go back to his cell, sleep, come back outside and go back to the ground and sleep some more.
Well, I
the
know-
whole bed.
Well, wait a minute, I
until
know-
he went out the front door.
Well, I know
Now,
that-
I've seen that
Well,
myself.
Wait, hold
Yeah,
on.
well, I've seen a lot of guys walk around.
Wait,
Play basketball
and sleep.
play
I know what you're
football,
talking about.
and sleep.
play,
I know
play,
what I'm
play all
talking
that
about.
and sleep.
And
And
sleep.
that's what
Yeah,
you said.
yeah,
When
you
we're
physically
talking about
sleep.
sleep, we're not talking
We're not talking
that.
about-
Well, what's
the
going
actual
on
thing
with that?
that we mean
It's
is
like
that
a
the
defense
person's
mechanism, I
life
see
has
that.
been put on hold, that he
put
just
on-
withdraws.
Withdrawn off.
His life
His
is a
experience
videotape
with
that
the
got
outside
cut off when he
world.
got
Yeah.
You
arrested.
see, Rev, if we
That's
face it,
essential.
we acknowledge the
Well,
fact,
What we talking about?
we all sleep.
At one time.
All right. Now, what we're talking about here now is the amount of time we sleep. Yeah. You often hear me and Wood refer to before we got involved. We're talking about the period when we were asleep. If we can consider our involvement consciously and efforts to change as being an awake period. All right. So we are in prison. That's what prison is about. They don't take people who are awoke to prison. They take people who are asleep in terms of the overall society. Straight, we ain't into it what the society's into. So they take us to prison. In prison, what Lonnie is saying, I think, is that the quality of our life can be addressed while we are in prison. And the amount of time that we sleep is determined by how bad we want to be awake.
But
But
you know,
I
can
don't
we
see
say?
why we keep hacking on what Lonnie said. And I think the majority of us are in agreement with Lonnie said. Those are the stages that we go through. We come in to sleep. For some of us, we come in to sleep. For some of us, we become awake. You understand? And we reach out to the outside world to be aware of what's taking place in the outside world. But you understand? Until we get out there, you understand? We cannot.
That's the difference I make with that is this.
definition on sleep,
Joe,
though,
the
I mean,
difference
like-
I make of that, let me pinpoint. When I was arrested, when I came to jail, in the jailhouse, I ain't talking about before I got upstate. Me and my wife, the day in the courtroom, when the judge sentenced me to a life bid. And I told that woman to go home and forget about me, and she said, when you get to that prison, you call me and I'll be there. I got to sing that Wednesday, she was there that Thursday, me and her sit down and we talked about how we, two of us now, see, Rip left his wife behind and went to sleep. But I stayed awake with my wife from the very beginning, and we made a decision how we were going to do this life bid together. All right? And that is what I'm talking about. And I'm not unique in that sense. There are other prisoners who have come to jail and their families have come with them from the very beginning and made a decision to stick with them. And out of that growth process, they have grown together, they have suffered together, and they have actually served these bids together.
But then the essence
That's
of what we call sleep, when we say a person is not asleep, is whether a person takes full control of his life. When I say full control of his life, is that he sets goals for himself. He locates himself. No, I keep using that term, and it's very dear. I haven't looked. I believe that a person at some point all right, must step outside of himself and view his life. You know what I mean? From a beginning to an end, no matter how he measures that. And sometimes that can be very difficult. And in that framework, he puts himself, he says, I'm here. You dig what I'm at? I'm here, and this is where I'm going to. All right? Now, it may not be done in exactly that way, but this is the kind of awakening that takes place when a person says, I'm no longer asleep. When you say that person is no longer asleep. What he says, this is where I'm going to go. This is where I'm at. This is where I'm going to go. Do you know what I mean? And he starts on a path. All right? And so like we say a path. A path, it defines a line of passage where a person has come from. Like we say in Exodus about the future, the past, and the present. You know, you must have those elements in his mind. He may not see them as such in his mind, but what he does, he has a plan in his mind. He knows where he's at in his mind, and he struggles toward it. And it doesn't have to do with success or failure. A lot of times in this society, we measure all that. I'm not measuring whether he ever reaches his goal or he ever reaches the direction he goes. I read a thing, and the guy said this. He says, I have learned, all right, that the many paths we travel in life are all equal. Oppressor and oppressed meet in the end. And the only thing that prevails is that life was altogether too short for both. And what I'm getting at is that it's highly unimportant whether a guy ever reached the goals he sets. What's more important is that he located himself and he set goals and he struggles toward them. Whether he ever meets them or not is highly important. How many times we seen dudes died in the joint? We seen dudes bug out in the joint. And the bug out wasn't so much a personal deficit on his part. Do you understand what I'm saying? He may have set goals that would struggle for him and got overwhelmed by the environment.
Well, wait a minute. I'm confused here now. You know, I mean, I understand about the struggle inside prison and so forth.
Yeah.
But I was under the impression, and tell me if I'm wrong, Rev, I'm under the impression that we're talking about a person being in prison for X amount of years and then returning to the street as Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome. A person was in prison, whether he was awake or asleep, going back into the street. How does that affect him? How does that tie in with the
But wait a minute, that's not
wait a
his idea whether he was asleep or whether he was awake in jail. Not whether he just goes in the street. It's what took place in jail. Is he asleep during the whole bid? Does he sleep part of the bid? You know what I mean? When he goes in the street...
But see, Larry, that's, you know, that's your question. And I'm trying to deal with the question that was put before us.
Yeah.
Or
You know,
understand the
Rip Van
question.
Why don't you all agree? Why don't
Rip
you?
Van Wrinkle Syndrome is whether a person sleeps and how long he sleeps when he's in jail.
Why
And
don't you?
when does he wake up?
Yeah, and
Why don't you-
wake up?
But,
Why don't y'all agree that all y'all said? I mean, you're responding to questions that you all had. In fact, what happened? I think what I seen. Larry agreed with what Lonnie said. You had a question that you responded to, but you all made different, brought out more questions. You know what I'm saying? But you're doing this. I mean, you're doing this consciously. But how can, what I'm saying is, maybe you try to bring this back to the same question.
Yeah.
Let me respond to that then. Let me respond to the original question. I'm going to respond to the original question. What I think I heard was that whether when we go outside, whether we feel or realize the time that we missed out there, or maybe I should say that differently. By being in jail, we are considered sleep as far as what's going on outside. And when we go outside, and after being in jail for a long time, we go outside, how does the society accept us, and how do we accept society? Do we feel that we've missed anything? Do we feel alienated? Do we feel that
That's not a bad way of putting it. You know, I think you captured a lot of
But
that.
that is basically the question.
I think there's a correlation between people spending time in prison and the Rip Van Winkle effect. To my way of thinking, no matter how a person does spend his time, whether he's in the womb That means he's nurturing himself, he's growing, he's developing, he's getting to know himself or the tune. That means there's no development whatsoever. He's just falling victim to the influences of this negative environment that we're in. To my way of thinking, when a person is incarcerated, he's asleep as far as the society go, because we're not allowed to participate, we're not voting, we're not raising and taking care of our family, we're not participating in the activities of society. So in that sense, to me, being in prison is like being asleep. No matter how we develop in here, no matter how we utilize our time, as far as society go, we're asleep. Why? Because we're not participating in the activities of society. Now, I spent 13 years incarcerated so far, right? And to me, that's like being asleep, even though I don't experience a lot of the harshness and realities of it in here because time stands still. But when I get a visit, when I see my 12-year-old niece come up, and she was conceived after I've been down, then it dawns on me that time is going by. Then it dawns on me that the pace in society is moving, you know? And I feel like my hands are tied. I feel that for the period of time I've been incarcerated, I've been asleep.
Yeah, you know, that's true. And that brings you right back to what I originally was trying to say. That when we do go outside, now I went outside once. I realized that what had happened, the pace had picked up. Things were happening, more things were happening. The same situations were out there. Same circumstances of living and living conditions were out there. I was not in it. When I went out after being in here for a long time and went out, I seen it. But what also I seen while I was inside, I was fortunate enough to have an idea what was going on out there and how I should react in order to continue to develop myself and succeed in living. I thought I did that. I thought I did that. What I'm saying is that although I wasn't out there, life was going on, and by developing myself in here, I was out there and able to cope with the changing of the times out there. I saw enough of that. I'm also saying that though we miss things, though we go out there and like we've slept, of course we've missed, we were not participating.
Incarcerated, did you feel it was a new experience when you went back out there?
I want to tell you something, Justice. The first day I got out and looked at the streets, all right, I didn't really become conscious that I was out until I got to the streets. In other words, I walked out of here and got in the car drove me from in front of the prison to Poughkeepsie, New York.
Yeah.
All right? But I wasn't relating to it at that moment. When the car stopped, it was necessary for me to cross the street and go into the parole office. The street seemed so wide.
So yeah.
It seemed so wide.
You've seen it before.
And I'm wondering whether or not I'm gonna get hit.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And the last thing I want to do is get hit by a car to break going out. When I came home,
Yeah.
When I came home,
And it does seem
I left my house.
real strange.
4 years.
Yeah.
Went back to the same house.
Yeah.
Went back to the same house.
Yeah.
Same bedroom.
Yeah.
Sat down and looked at my bedroom.
It ain't the same.
Damn, it seemed different.
Why? What was different?
I don't know, as slight as I did.
No, right now, I'm thinking back. Think about right now. What do you think was different?
No, she painted the room. The room was painted and all kinds of just little changes.
Yeah.
But it just all seemed different.
But why do you think that is?
Yeah, I like to ask
Why you think that? Yeah, why you think, Bam?
No, I soon learned after maybe crossing 10 streets
Go ahead.
that they was the same. The distance that I looked at, when I look at a house, the house looked way down there. But I soon discovered that it was the same.
Yeah.
But my vision had been internalized because that wall blocks it. And you can only see a certain distance. Whenever you look, and only extend to a certain distance. Now, when you
think
look
my-
and your vision is endless, everything seems so far away.
Well, my
You know why?
No, Ryan, hey,
what
Bam,
happens?
Ryan, them subways after you come out?
In my mind,
Well,
in my mind,
those
I
subways-
had
oh.
a fixed picture of my house.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was in my mind.
Yeah.
But in reality,
Yeah.
you understand? It was much larger than what was in my mind.
You know what I think
Everything is
happens?
different.
You know what happens is
For them
this.
7.5
You ever
years.
notice that,
I
like,
liked it.
Always
you get
love
you buy a
Real
cassette
first.
tape. You in the cell. You buy a cassette tape.
I ain't talking about
A new
the
side just
inside
come
tape.
out that you've been wanting to
I'm
get.
talking about the end of
So
your
you
thoughts
get-
lead to the street.
You get the cassette tape
Constantly.
and you play it, right? And you done heard it on the radio and you play it and you groove to it. You listen to it. And you listen to everything
Oh,
about
yeah,
it. It just
talking
turns you on. Now think what
Try to
happens.
get to the street.
The more you listen to that tape, do you understand what I'm saying? The less return you get from that tape. The less you hear in that tape. The focus changes.
Wait a minute.
The more the more you go through a thing, this is what we call familiarity. You don't take in as much.
I think
There's
it-
certain things your mind blocks out, just takes for granted. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sometimes, like, cause the more I hear jazz tape, the more things I hear in it.
That's true.
What I'm saying, I mean,
But it's not the same as when you first heard. What I'm trying to show you is that it's not the same as when you first heard. It's just like when you get high.
I agree
You know,
with
so
you.
the first time you
Yeah,
got out, I remember the
yeah,
first time I smoked a reefer. Oh my goodness! And I never been able to go back there.
Take
Never.
out the rest of your life.
I ain't never got it. I ain't lying. The guy took me on the
Well, that's
street.
what they
The
say about
project. I
cocaine.
went on the subway.
I think that's a different
And we
situation.
were laughing.
now. You talking about?
And I
different
remember a guy
situation.
got on the subway, had on a looked like a trench coat and a briefcase. And I looked at him and I closed my eyes and cracked up laughing. I opened my eyes up, the whole row was filled with them dudes. I seen it plain as day. Hey,
What were you on, Larry?
and it shook me. And I was trying to tell him, he was sitting on the side, and I'm pointing, He said, what? And I'm pointing because the whole row was full of these same dudes, right? But I never was able to recapture that.
Hey, Larry,
What happens is that when we go to the
that's
street,
funny.
when we come here and we think about the street, we reminisce over our past experiences, right? And we try to keep it as sharp as when they first occurred. And every time we go back and think about it, it changes. Sometimes we add
I
stuff
think
to
you
it.
change it.
Sometimes things die. But when you go back and view the same thing, it ain't the same.
You know, Larry, can I say
What is
something?
not the same about it? You saying it gets smaller? That's what I'm.
No,
I'm
no, what I'm saying
disagreeing
is
with.
perception
I think if you look at it,
Perception changes.
more.
He's simply saying that with familiarity, perception changes.
Yeah, but-
we are, Charlie. Catch up with us. There are people.
Catch up with it. You just changing it.
No, I'm not changing anything, Charlie.
No, you're not.
There are
All right.
people, Charlie, who are in prison who don't constantly talk about what they did yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
There are people in prison talking about what they're going to do tomorrow
Uh-huh.
and what they're going to do this day here.
Uh-huh.
And depending on whether you are a prisoner walking around in jail talking about what you did yesterday and how much fun you had yesterday and that big bag you had and that big car you had and that beautiful girl you had yesterday, yesterday's dream don't fit into tomorrow's world.
I maintain.
You're saying that to say
What I'm saying
how
is,
you
what I'm
relate that
saying
to
is,
what he
what I'm
just
saying
said?
is that perception of the world decides, as far as I'm concerned, whether you're asleep or whether you are awake while you're
I
in
knew
prison.
you wasn't talking about the same thing. Now you just stood up there and said it all related to the same thing, man.
What I'm getting at, there's a term they
No,
use called
don't say what
diminishing-
you get up now, but you might tell him what you was talking about.
And no, this
For a change.
There's a term called diminishing returns.
Like, come here,
What diminishing returns is the more you do a thing,
Yeah.
the less
The less you
return
get back.
That's what he was saying.
Are we talking about a guy coming to prison and becoming unfamiliar with the outside world while he's in prison?
Yeah, basically, it took me a while to understand that I think the key thing to this is that we all realize that while you're gone, changes occur. You try to minimize the amount of changes by trying to keep up with the events that are occurring that include you.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So that when you get out there, there's not that much of a change that you have to cope with.
All that much.
But the problem is, how does the impact of any change in the street affect the person? Most of us go and we feel it's a drag. Most of us try to minimize the fact that any change took place. We try to deny it. that a change took place. We try to act like no change took place at all. We go there and we try to act like I've been there before. I ain't let nobody know I just come here and I'm unfamiliar with this situation. I'm sorry. That we unfamiliar with the situation. I mean, when I went home, I didn't want nobody to know that I wasn't familiar with a lot of stuff. I tried my best to show that I'm up on it. This is the kind of society we live in. You must be up on it. You don't know. Damn, Bama. It's a drag. You know, that's
what do you say about that change? There are people in prison, and who feel that they don't have to change because they are so perfect in their knowledge, they're so perfect in their appearance and in their ability that all they got to do is just walk back out there in that world and everything is gonna fit perfect for them.
Yeah, but you see, we're talking about the Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome. You see, the guy who lives in the past, and the guy who feels that the way he is the way he ought to be in prison is asleep.
He's still asleep.
He's still asleep. Now, how long he stays asleep, some of us do a whole bit that way. Yeah. Some do it 20 years. Like Rip Van Wrinkle stay asleep 20 years that way. There are other people in prison who soon begin to realize that there's a necessity. There's a necessity, man, for him to become conscious of his own life, of the quality of life that he's living, the quality of life that's around him, the quality of life of the community he's gonna go back into. This guy wakes up in prison. When he wakes up in prison, then he no longer be a creature of the past. But every last one of us, when we first come into the prison, we talked about what we did.
But now wait.
How it was.
Wait. That's
how we thought it was.
That may be true. In the beginning, that may be true.
Let me tell you something. We also know. Like when I came to prison, I realized that it was something wrong. You understand? That this is not the way I wanted to continue my life. So something had to be wrong. And what I had to do, I had to examine what I was doing before I got here, and what brought me here. You understand? And what changes I had to make, you know, to render that. Right. So I had to look inside myself first. Right. And I said, well, you know, I've been doing this, and I've been doing this, and I've been doing this. And the only thing that led to was right here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start making changes. So I'm gonna I make changes here, I make changes there, and I made changes there. Now that I've made those changes, I got myself to where I want. I said, well, now let me start looking for the future. Now what am I gonna do? Do I wanna go back to my same neighborhood? Understand, and take a chance of getting right back into the same thing I did before? Or I wanna relocate or look for a better place to live.
But did you notice for a moment, Jojo, when you made that decision inside the joint, that certain people's in the joint no longer appealed to you?
When I made that choice,
yeah,
I knew why they no longer.
I'm saying, but you know the same guy in the joint.
Yeah,
it's like Lonnie was saying. See, the guy they're talking about yesterday, you don't even want to rap with him.
True.
You want to seek out that guy that's talking about tomorrow. What he's going to do tomorrow. How he's going to relate to tomorrow. What do tomorrow mean to him?
Or what's he doing right now?
You run across a guy, and like you too, just like you said, I ran to a lot of guys who kept saying, man, remember we used to do such and such and such, man, and blah blah this and blah blah. Yeah, all that's cool, Holmes. You understand? Yeah, we did that. But now I'm thinking about doing such and such and such. What about you?
You know, can I ask you a
Oh
question?
man, I'm blah blah. Oh, okay, I'll see you later.
I want to ask you, how many people when they first started their bids had a loved one that they sit down with and talked over the changes that they were going to make and the things that they were going to do or try to?
Well, see, I know.
You would need to examine 41,000 individuals.
No, I just asked you in this room. I asked right here.
I couldn't say that I did.
I did with my loved ones and with someone who I respect. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about a month before I got my.
Okay, all right. Now I know where you're coming from.
Once I become certain that I was coming to prison, all right, and that I'm gonna come to prison with a double life sentence, all right. I didn't know at that point that the judge was going to separate my sentence under a special law that allowed him to separate multiple life sentences. But I knew that I was gonna get them 2 life sentences. Once I got them and they were separated. But before that, a month before that, I sat down with my sisters, my 2 sisters, and one of my brothers. And we went over it in detail, what we're going to have, what my expectation was of them, what my expectation was of myself, and what my expectation would be of the people that I would relate to. All right? Now, I also talked to other people that what was going to happen, how I was going to do my bit. was going to be involved in, what it was going to mean to me to serve the time. Okay, that in a sense allowed me to wake up. Instead of me staying asleep 10 years on this new bit, I want to stay asleep 5 because I went to sleep. Now you got to understand something. That most of us, when we get these sentences, if our sentences is not real, if our situation is not real cut and dry, we are angry. We are angry. Our decision, our first decision, is who we are angry at. And so you go to sleep on your anger. You don't think about anything that's creative or anything. You're thinking about killing the first guy that messed with you. You think about hitting the first police that messed with you. You think about, man, not being with this guy, not being with that guy. I did that for 5 years. Finally, I determined that the only person I had on the face of the earth to be angry with was myself. Now, once I understood that my anger lied with myself, then I can go about and correct that and straighten it out. So the first 5 years of this sentence, I was dead asleep. All right? I was dead asleep. I was up in Clinton, man, and when I first come down here in Green Haven, man, I was dead asleep.
Let me ask you another question. Jojo brought up a good point. When he went back to his room, the room had changed. But what about the fact that Jojo had changed?
You want to ask me?
In other words, the fact that you had changed, does that also change your perception of the room?
I think it did. I think that had it played a part in it also. But I have to admit that my change wasn't nothing positive. Because when I came out angry. I don't know how that may have affected my view, but I came out angry because I felt I was wrong being there in the first place, and I felt a lot of wrong was done to me while I was there. So when I came my first bit, when I came home, I was angry anyway. So matter of fact, everything looked different to me, really. You understand? I had a different outlook toward the whole world.
So your anger changed your perception.
Changed my perception to a lot of things. And like I was telling Larry, I had a picture in my mind of how things were going to be and what things I was going to do and how things looked when I left it. When I came back, there was some difference. I couldn't really put my finger on and say what was different, but I knew something was different. The room was different. The house was different. You understand? Even the dog looked different.
You know what, Rev, when you were out, I asked the question of the group. How many people in this room had came upstate, before they came upstate, when they caught their sentence, said sit down and talked over how they were going to do their prison sentence with a loved one. All right? And Bama had said that he had done that, and it had allowed him to wake up earlier, he believes, than he would have woken up, to the situation if he had not had those people in support of him. I believe that Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome, that the same as Bama woke up earlier, I believe that the prisoner who has a family, see, Rip Van Wrinkle slept alone. They got another song that who paid the rent for Mrs. Rip Van Winkle while Rip Van Winkle was away. You understand? See, so it was a separate thing between Rip and his wife.
I think Rip was in Easton.
Yeah, for those 20 years. I think that's right. And didn't want to tell nobody where he was locked up at. You understand? So the thing is, I think that the Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome is definitely different for different prisoners. But I think whether he has family, or whether he has a friend that cares about him, or whether he has somebody to sit down and tell him, well, listen, we can have a life even while you're there.
What about, when you wake up sometimes and you're disoriented,
Right.
you don't know where you are, you don't know what time it is, you don't know what day it is.
That's a deep fear.
Does that ever does that kind of disorientation take place? Do you wake up in prison ever?
Fair. Yep.
And wonder, how did I get here?
When I got busted,
I don't know about waking up from
when I got busted on this bit here, and I went to Rikers Island, I couldn't believe that I was arrested for what I got. I couldn't believe that I got busted again. Period. I couldn't even accept that fact. For about almost 4 months, I was totally out of it. Period. If you're talking about disorientation, I was ready for Thorazine, to be truthful. But one day, one of the people that I worked with came to visit me on the island, a friend, as well as a working companion. And She said, why don't you start asking your lawyer about questions dealing with your case and doing this and that and the other, giving me a means of a goal to get back into things.
Okay.
You dig what I'm saying? And I'm saying in my mind, yeah, man, you know, what's with you? You know, what the fuck? You know, excuse my language. You know, why are you out there when you're supposed to be trying to concentrate on what's really happening? You have to accept the fact that you're here now, you know, because that man, I'm telling you, man, I quit smoking when I went out to the street. You follow what I'm saying? I went back to smoking straight up and down, man. As soon as I got in the bullpen, give me some packs. You know, I was through, man. You understand what I'm saying? And that feeling, it was no hate. It was just a total. I was so messed up, man. I couldn't believe it.
You build on something you just said.
No, we
You
go
had
back to that same thing.
No. You had that one woman ask you that one question. Suppose you had someone every day from the time that you got
I'd probably handled my situation a whole lot differently.
That's what I was talking
All
about.
right.
Well, cool.
I did have, to that
see,
extent,
see.
somebody to give me an orientation.
Wait a minute, see. That's cool, Lonnie. You had somebody to do
No,
that.
that's-
But
and
what
then-
about the guy who don't have nobody to do that?
Jojo, my point is this: is that if you're talking about the Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome, my point is the guy who has a family member or a friend or anybody who is there with him all the way, inspiring him, needling him, making him realize.
Won't let him go to sleep.
Won't let him go to sleep. That's my point.
All right,
Okay, now, wait a minute.
But a good question that you have to ask. Suppose you have all that. You have somebody keeping you awake,
Oh,
keeping
no,
your
Rip, don't
attention.
do that to me.
Now wait a minute.
Don't do that to me, Rick.
When you go back, do you experience the syndrome?
What's the what?
Do you still experience the Rip syndrome?
You can, Rip.
You can. Just like
What?
you can.
When you go back,
to
yeah, there's gonna be a difference.
Go back to sleep.
When you go back,
No, when you go back to society,
Society.
do you still experience?
That's right.
the syndrome?
Yeah.
You know what, Rev?
Maybe not to
Rev,
the same
Rev.
extent.
Yeah, might not to the same extent. You know, me and my wife would sit down and talk. But when I go home, it's her taking me out in the street, showing me things, getting me over, getting
Take
me
you
familiar.
shopping and all that other stuff.
Rip Van Winkle Syndrome.
That's
You know what?
that is part of it.
But it's that being sleep.
Listen, hold up. The description that you give, I'm gonna show you something. You see the description that you
Not in the
give?
same
You
form.
said when she took you out there in the street, right? What she was doing was exposing to you, right? Not just the things that had happened while you were gone.
Yeah.
Do you understand? But the newness.
Yeah.
And that's a very important thing. Like I say, that the change itself, the newness of what's happening outside, it is how we view that newness is where the problem lies. Some people will turn it off. They get nothing from it. They don't learn. That's what knowledge is. Exposing to the unknown, exposing to something new. They deny it. They try to deny it like it wasn't there, and they act all cool. You know, like I've been through it before, and this is all I've been through all.
Get
Listen,
bored.
listen. Yeah,
Lonnie
when
just
somebody opens it up and makes it real for you, makes you.
Lonnie just proved my point about what I was saying before. You were still asleep. Now, yeah, you were still in a form that is still asleep. If someone has to re-enter you into something new or introduce you to something new, you just say because you're unaware of it, you don't know about it, you're still asleep. Now, back to this other thing that he's
They said,
talking
well,
about.
hold on. Let's go over this thing about sleep again. What is
Yeah,
sleep?
Sleeping is in a symbolic sense
But see-
of not knowing.
No, we're not talking about not
wait,
knowing,
wait,
JoJo.
wait,
We're not talking about not knowing. When me and her, when I get out of jail, on my day of release, the journey that I'm sharing with her don't end. She don't drop me on the day of my release and say, now you go for yourself. The same way we did this together, we gonna do that together. The same way when she came in here, I had to show her different rules and regulations about how prison is run to introduce her to something new. She has to take me out there to show me how that's being ran. But we both are not asleep. We are awake, experiencing a journey together.
In other words, what he's saying, the sleep is not knowing. The sleep is closing yourself off.
That's the sleep.
Fine.
Yeah, it
Closing
is
yourself off.
Fine, wait a minute, fine. Well, I'm looking.
Hold up.
No, I don't get back to that book. I don't even argue that. Lonnie keeps talking about guys who have to have somebody, the loved ones, their friends, and so forth. You understand? To keep them awake while they're in prison. You speak for those guys. I'm gonna speak for the guys who don't have nobody.
I ain't got no problem with that.
Let's clarify that, because you keep making it sound like that's the only way that you can be awake.
That's the only guy I can speak for.
Cool.
population,
Bama
though.
with all his influence and friends that he had to talk to him 5 years. It took a guy like myself only 1 year, and less than 1 year. It took me as soon as I hit upstate, and I hit upstate 4 months after sentence.
You've been had a
Soon
woman
as
ever since I know you.
I'm gonna always have a woman, but at that time I didn't have no woman. You said she wasn't in my plans right then because I was undecided how I was gonna do this. You said, or if I was gonna do it. Because I was thinking about, man, just like Bama said, it took me a while. I said, man, something is wrong. You understand? Hold, stop, everything. Women, everybody else, stop. Something is wrong. And when I say something is wrong, then I want everything to stop so I can examine it. Okay. And once I examine it, and once I see where I'm going or what I need, then I go on and proceed. But until then, everything's on hold.
But that's orientating
Women,
yourself.
friends, and everybody. I don't care what you call it.
You know, that's
I'm only saying that
orientating
it can be done with it can be done individually.
Right.
You don't really need if you don't have. If you have somebody, that's good and cool. But if you don't, you understand? You gotta look within.
What wakes
That's
people
what
up?
we were talking
What
about. That
makes
before.
me look?
What wakes people up?
Experiences.
You know,
Experiences.
something woke Rip up after 20 years. Maybe he just slept in it.
The problem
You know,
was
but
over.
what is it that wakes us
The
up?
problem was
Rip,
over with Rip.
see,
The war was
I don't
over.
know. Well, in my case,
when we
it was
look-
somebody
when-
telling me
when we
something
talk about
to
Rip,
orientate me back into
and
the
story of
situation
Rip,
that I
Rip
was in.
actually
You know,
asleep.
basically.
See, when we talk about Rip Van Wrinkle, he was actually asleep. Z's were coming all out of him, flies buzzing all around his head and everything else. He was
Beard
asleep.
growing, yeah.
You understand? Now, when we talk about the symbol of it, the symbol of sleepiness, that's somebody that is conscious but not awake. Now, you say, I can't relate it to him, you know, what woke him up, because he was actually asleep. It could have been one of those flies buzzing around his head. You understand?
But can we start with the first premise that he went to sleep at a crucial point in history? He went to sleep while the war was going on. All right. Now, and when people was killing each other and shooting at each other, when there was a lot of problems that was taking place, Rip chose those particular 20 years when history was changing to go to sleep. You know, it's not that he just chose to go to sleep at any old time. And this lets me know that the author in the story was trying to tell us something about Rip Van Wrinkle. That a lot of time when a lot of problems is going on around us, that we will use that time to go to sleep. And I'm saying that a lot of guys in prison do that. When prison is a good time, they would say, well, man, if I don't think there's a convict alive who didn't get a bid and said, you know, if I got 10 years, if I could just go to sleep right now and wake up 10 years from now, I'd be all right.
But does sleep solve problems, or do they create problems?
Well, the problem is it is a desire that
Yeah, I mean, but
some of
once a
us
guy
have
does
to go to sleep.
I
Till
think
the
you do
guy
both
does
of them, Larry. I think you do both of them.
He faces a problem, a
Yeah.
crisis.
Yeah.
And he goes to sleep to deal with that crisis, to get away
Or
from
to
it,
avoid dealing
overwhelming,
with
or
it.
to avoid it, or get away from
I think what the sleep does, it compounds. Don't move that. I think what the sleep does is compounds the problem.
it. You mean when he wakes up, that problem plus is there.
That problem plus is there. You know what I mean? He got, you know, I heard JoJo make a point about, it took me 5 years to wake up. It took him a year to wake up. All right? And that's a part of of sleeping in prison. It's a part of it. It's a crucial part of it. Some guys can become so angry at finding themselves in prison, whether they're going to blame the society for their being in prison, or whether they're going to blame themselves for being in prison. Their anger goes so deep that it takes them a longer time to get over it.
I know one dude took 10 years.
Some guys, it depends on what a guy comes to prison for.
Yes.
You know what I mean? A guy may come to prison for just trying to, I tried to write a book once. I still got maybe 200 pages of it in my cell. I might go back to it when they call it Second Chance. And in this book, I'm trying to tell a story about a guy who stole a loaf of bread and went to prison for 20 years to life.
Sounds familiar.
Huh? And another, take another guy who murders a baby and goes to prison for 20 years to life. You got two different situations existing there. You got two different reasons to sleep. The guy that took the loaf of bread might very well do what Larry said. He may want to go to sleep, man. I mean, what Lonnie said, for the whole 10 years. Just go to sleep and just go to sleep. When he wake up, it's bang. The dude that did that up there was a charge, man. Got a lot on his mind. He wants to duck.
He
So
doesn't want to face
yeah,
it.
that comes into play when you talk about how long a person sleeps.
You know, Bama, can the guy say this? You know, say like you mentioned the guy who killed a baby. You know, I mean that's an extreme case. You know.
It used to be an
What
extreme
happened?
case.
Yeah, I mean, for the guy himself, you know, whatever motivated him to do that, what he's faced with now is how his peers and those around him judge him on that. Okay? And what happens to this guy is indicative of what happens to most people. Probably what happened to me. It made me wake up because I can't put my hand. You know, what happens, I think a realization comes to a person, you know what I mean, that how we view ourselves and how we are viewed by others is not the only way that it has to be. You know what I mean? That we can change the way we view ourselves. We can change the way that we are. If a person really goes to sleep when he gets up on himself, when he says it will never be any different or there won't be any change, and this is how it's going to be for the length of my bed. You know what I mean? And then when I look down the road, them 20 years I do, the 25 years I'm going to do, it's all going to be like this.
You know, Larry, I think that's a new phenomenon. I think that's a new phenomenon. I think that's a completely new phenomenon because you know when you and I first started doing this, that certain charges just didn't fit in. The convict himself just didn't accept the guy.
Right.
You understand? So he was like locked in to his sleep. Even if he wanted to wake up, he couldn't wake up and say, hold up, man, I can deal with it. They just wouldn't help.
They wouldn't
now,
let him
today,
do out. They lock him into that. You know,
today in prison
this.
is different.
They beat him. I seen them beat a dude. Remember that guy they beat over that man? You know, I said, why the guy stand up and beat that guy like that, man? You know, that guy raped the baby. You know, it really dawned on me what we do to other people and the judgments we make against them, man. You know what I mean? We cut a person's life off by that. People a lot of times are moved by the judgments you make about them. You know what I mean? They bounce off them. They expand a person's world. A person sees himself as A, and you come along and say, "Oh man, that's beautiful. You're B." You know, and what that does is expands the horizons, the possibility for a person, and it makes him strive toward being B, to convince himself, to take on the aspects of B that he can see, because someone else sees these things. You know what I mean? Well, these things expand a person's horizon. This way can wake a person up because it make him strive toward it. But a lot of times in our judgments, we lock a person into a given thing. We say, man, you baby raper, a baby raper. We never let a guy be anything more. We never let a guy even think that he can be anything more. He don't think he can be anything more. So you say, well, he don't think they never. You can expand his horizons by showing him that you ain't got to be A. I see you a D.
There's something else though that I've seen individuals who guys have tried to lock in to particular images, and they broke out of it.
Yeah.
Right, now see, yeah. See, they broke there. See, so that's my point. It don't happen. There are some guys that they gain a strength. Right, now where they get that strength from, be it internal or external, might be depending on the individual. But they gain a strength to break out of the images that people once saw them. One of my heroes, and one of a lot of black heroes, was post Attica. All right, even though he come out of Detroit, was Malcolm X. Was a convict, and he educated himself while he was in prison. He didn't have no college programs. And earlier the statement was made that education seems to be a thing that came about, after Attica. Structured education, yes. But men who was in prison years ago read every book that they could get their hands on.
That's true.
Some of them. And even when they brought education into prison, one of the first things they did was give people efficiency tests. And they found out that a lot of guys, even without the structured education, was awarded BAs, AAs, and everything else because they had accumulated on their own and strived on their own to learn. One of the brightest convicts I ever came in contact with was Johnny Flowers. All right. Now Johnny Flowers was well educated. I mean, well rounded from books. And he used, and I'll tell you another guy who has no high school education even to this day. But you can take him into the field of literature, Big Billy Surratt. Yeah. And he can quote Shakespeare. He can quote sonnet after sonnet. He can quote Caesar, all this stuff, because it was a thing then for a guy to be able to learn these plays and espouse them back or spew them out on the galleries and stuff. So structured education brought in a institution on the outside that sanctioned the education that the prisoners had. But prison has always been a place that some men grasped the opportunity to learn under. And that learning process allowed them to shadow a lot of those shaped images that other people had of them and shaped images that they had of themselves.
Lonnie, are you also saying that just because I'm in prison, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm asleep?
That's what I've been saying ever since I started talking.
I just want to... All right.
All right, but now
That's
I want
not
to raise a question.
been the general idea. It seemed to me that what has also been said, that because you're in jail that you're asleep.
And that's part of
Well, I maintain the fact that we are in jail, that each and every last one of us experience a degree of sleep. To what extent are we asleep depends upon how we view ourselves.
And my only
what about the young fellas that's coming in
that
now?
condition just to jail.
Okay.
See, that's my problem. I don't isolate it and just say that. I think that people on the outside can experience they got people walking up and down the street. I think Ronald Reagan sleep. After I heard him say that thing about Billy Bob's yesterday, I don't think Ronnie is fully awake. You understand?
Yeah, but that
So you can be on the outside and be asleep and doze off and take little slumbers and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know, we maybe at some point should have differentiated between sleep and the big sleep.
Yeah.
all right, but what about Lonnie stressed the point about structured education and unstructured education, how certain brothers strive to educate themselves while in prison, and then and later on were given a structured way of doing it. But now, what about the young brothers that are coming in now that are busted for whatever reasons? Are they susceptible to the Rip Van Wrinkle Syndrome, or are they or were they in it when they were in the street and now?